Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to February's masterclass. I can't believe yet another month has flown over and we are ready to get started in the next in our series. This topic that we're going to be talking about today is really close to my heart right now because working with lots of different leaders in lots of different sectors and organizations, they're all navigating some quite challenging situations right now. And some of those situations absolutely are in their control and they can influence and they can create change through. But others are things that they're communicating down to their teams, to the rest of the organization, when actually some of the key messages or decisions are not necessarily within their complete control. And so we thought it would be a great topic to dig into for today's masterclass. So, as usual, feel free to add any comments into the chat box on YouTube or on LinkedIn, wherever you're joining us from. And if you're watching the replay, welcome. It's great to have you all here. And we'll get started on what we're going to cover today. So, a little bit first for those that might be new to us. I know we've got some regulars now, which is great, and we're building some momentum there. But if you're new to us, I'm Michaela Rini, and I run an organization called Opportunity Global. We work with leaders who are absolutely brilliant at their jobs, but sometimes they struggle with the people stuff, because it's the people stuff that often gets a little bit messy and very, very human. And often that's because nobody taught us how to do things like give feedback that lands, have difficult conversations, or build teams where people actually want to show up. So we really believe that better leaders create better businesses, and that's what we help make happen. So if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, I'm fairly active in those spaces, and I love continuing these conversations beyond today and beyond our masterclasses. So let's get into the detail. We do a masterclass every month, so these are completely free, and we'd love to see you at other ones in the future too. So right now, I don't know if you feel like this, but I know a lot of people that we're talking to, a lot of our clients, organizations, people are feeling a little bit like we're all in a snow globe right now. Everything's quite shaken up, whether that's the political uncertainty that we're facing, tariffs impacting trade across the world, economic shifts that are happening, and what is quite frankly some of the horrific examples of leadership that we're seeing on our global stages. And so we're all kind of trying to figure out how we handle that, as well as one of the biggest disruptions and opportunities in our lifetime, really, which is figuring out how AI is going to disrupt us and equally help us innovate. It's probably going to be both, right? And so for some of you, you're navigating all of these things alongside the day job, the business as usual stuff. And that might be on top of navigating some changes in your organizations, whether that's new ways of working, rolling out digital transformation, going through restructures, maybe some redundancies or team transitions. And what happens in those situations is that your team is absolutely looking at you for some answers. Yeah. Maybe not all the answers, because you probably don't have them, but they are looking for something from you. They're looking for some level of support, a bit of certainty, a bit of clarity. And one of the big questions that we are getting from organizations, leaders, people who are reading our newsletter and reaching out to us is, how do I lead when I don't yet have all of the answers? Because let's be honest about it, right? Most of the time, we don't have all the answers, especially right now. Some timelines might be unclear in your organization. Decisions might be being made above us, or decisions might need to come from outside of our organizations before we can really move stuff forward. And so that information is often quite incomplete. But even in those moments, your team still needs you to show up. Yeah. Whether you're a leader with a title or you are a contributor in the workplace, I think we all have that collective responsibility to think about how we're intentional in what we do, how we communicate, and how we show up for the people around us. So I want to talk a little bit about what actually happens when we're under this pressure and this uncertainty. And it reminds me what's kind of playing out at the moment, what happened during COVID times. Yeah, it's almost a bit of a dirty word, that C word now, isn't it? But, not so long ago, we did see some of this pressure happening again, where under pressure, often leaders lose that capacity to hold the tension, hold the space for their team. So instead of saying, of staying present with that kind of discomfort and that uncertainty, we often see leaders do one of two things. And I think it's worth touching on this because it might resonate with some of you in how you're maybe recognizing some of this behavior in yourself, and you can build greater self-awareness around this and better self-understanding of what to do next. Or it might be that you're experiencing this from your board, from your senior leaders, from other people around you. So the kind of two extremes that I'm seeing play out when things are uncertain, when there's big levels of change happening, is that some people can really go to that extreme of trying to control everything. So micromanaging every single detail, maybe often making quite rash decisions, because then that makes them feel like they're doing something, like they're able to take action, they're able to move something forward. It could also be, and I hold my hands up, I know I've been definitely guilty of some of this in the past, is trying to be the hero. Yeah. So carrying all the pressure, the stress, the anxiety for the team, maybe protecting the team too much from information, from detail, carrying it all yourself. Or you maybe even kind of clamp down rather than opening up to what you might be feeling as you go through these changes and these more challenging moments. It's quite easy, isn't it, being a leader in the good times when things are going well, much, much more challenging when things are slightly uncertain, maybe a little bit challenging or difficult. The other extreme that we see happen is that people can completely disappear in these moments of challenge. Yeah. So maybe defaulting to like the script that HR have crafted for you. And no shade on HR out there. I'm sure the scripts are beautiful and I'm sure all that messaging is really important. But sometimes people hide behind those scripts and avoid some of the real conversations that need to happen. It might be that you're keeping people in the dark until you know more, until you know everything, until you've got every little bit of detail, which probably is not going to happen. Or the other thing that we often see happen is that people abdicate their responsibility as a leader to HR because they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable conversations. They don't want to have maybe the performance management conversation, or they don't want to be leading the whole conversation around redundancies, for example. And absolutely, we need our HR teams to support us through this stuff, but we still need to be present for our teams. We still need to be asking questions, supporting them, having our check-ins. Now, neither of these extremes work, but they often come from the same place, that leaders not knowing how to sit with that uncertainty themselves. So when we don't have that certainty, that clarity for ourselves, that has an impact on how we're feeling, yeah? It has an impact on our nervous system. It has an impact on how we then regulate and show up for the people around us. And your team can feel that. They can sense it, even if you're not saying it out loud. There will be habits, behaviors, actions that you're taking that are starting to feel uncomfortable to your team. So some of the ways that uncertainty might show up is that, patterns of behavior. And again, this is feedback that we're getting from the people that we work with. It could be that you're in firefighting mode more often than not. Yeah. You're reacting to everything around you, but not necessarily being as strategic in your thinking or in your way forward through things. So it can feel quite chaotic, actually, for your team and for you. You might recognize this either in yourself or in other people around you, that kind of performative calm, I call it, where we're saying everything's fine, it's okay, we'll get through it, while actually people recognize around them that things are not as they should be. It feels like there's a disconnect between what you're saying and actually how your team are feeling, what they're experiencing. And it can actually really destroy trust when we say or do those things. The other thing that we might see happen, and again, I think I've done this, maybe not for long periods of time, but certainly there's been days and moments where I felt like I just want to vanish and stop communicating. And when that happens, our teams are often left guessing. They, as human beings, if we have a gap in information and in communication, we'll fill that gap. We'll fill that with our own narratives, with our own assumptions. Often that can lead to gossip, which eventually erodes trust and can be very toxic in our cultures and in our teams. And that can really, again, not intentionally as a leader, you want to make that happen, but by vanishing, that's often what can come across and start happening in your teams. The avoidance thing is kind of a bit similar, but slightly different in that you might not be talking. So you're not disappearing, but you're maybe not talking about what's going on. Yeah, you're avoiding the conversation about the restructures or the redundancies that are coming because it feels a bit uncomfortable, feels a bit tricky to navigate. One thing that I've definitely recognized in myself in previous life is the speed trap. So making quick decisions without fully thinking them through because you are under pressure, you want to take action, you want to keep momentum, and you might not have fully thought through every single scenario and consequence. Or it could be that you are keeping information to yourself. Yeah. You don't want to worry your team more. So you're very much protecting them from what's going on, which might feel like a nice thing to do, but it's not the kindest thing to do. Because actually, if we're more truthful and honest about what's going on, even when we don't have all the answers, that's the stuff that really helps people. Yeah, even if you don't have all the information. But we'll go into that a little bit later. So that's kind of setting the scene of what might be showing up for you in your workplace or with your leaders, the people around you, what you might be seeing happening in some of the behaviors and actions. What I'd like to tell you a little bit more about now is a bit of an honest conversation about my own experience with change and with navigating really challenging times. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't get it all right, and neither will you. And we kind of have to, as leaders, understand that about ourselves, understand that about, the way in which we work. It's never going to be perfect. What even is perfect? Yeah. We're not always going to get it right. Not everyone's always going to like you in these situations. But it's really thinking about how you want to handle it, how you want to show up, even when you haven't got all the information available to you. So it was late January 2023. And I was on a call, which I still very much remember with very real, painful clarity. And I was about to make 35 people redundant. People that I cared about, people who trusted me, people whose lives were about to be turned upside down and deeply impacted by this news. And I have to say, it was definitely one of my worst days as a leader. And it wasn't just because of what I knew I had to do and what I had to say on that call, although that was brutal enough for my team and for them to hear it. But it was also because of what I didn't do in the months leading up to that moment. And it is still a mistake that in my moments of stress, in my moments of overwhelm, I absolutely still beat myself up about. And I'm working on that. I'm working on that reframe. I'm working on the processing of it. But this stuff sticks with us, right? And in that lead up, I guess where I was so disappointed in myself and how I handled it is that I didn't trust my gut instinct. I didn't have the conversation sooner. I didn't bring the situation to a close when I think deep down I knew it needed to happen. And it's super easy to say this stuff in hindsight, right? It's easy to reflect back on moments and think about what we would do differently. And I really encourage you as leaders to be doing that self-reflection frequently, whether that's every week, every month, whatever it looks like for you. Do those deep dives on the stuff that's working, the stuff that isn't working, the things that you would want to do differently. Because I think that's really where our deepest learning comes from. So it really still kind of kicks me when I think about it. Yeah. And most of what was happening in that situation, the stuff going on in the background that led to this scenario, was out of my control. So the timeline wasn't mine and my senior leadership teams to dictate. And I definitely didn't have all the answers when people wanted them or when people needed them. But I do know that I could have had those honest conversations sooner. I could have maybe started preparing people earlier, even when I didn't have all the details. So, what I do think, though, I got right in this scenario, and it's probably why some people still don't really like me in that situation, is that I chose not to be nice about it. And I know that sounds harsh, but bear with me on it, because if I'd have just been nice, that would have meant hiding parts of the truth to save people's feelings. Yeah. I would have maybe avoided the conversation until I had more definitive information. I'd have maybe been giving more false hope because it felt kinder in the moment. And instead, I decided to be honest, even when people didn't want to hear it. Yeah, I shared what I knew so far, the half information, the incomplete details, the uncertainty. And I was really open about the stuff that I didn't know and the stuff I didn't have control over. And I didn't try and pretend things were better than they were. That for me was kind, it was open, but it wasn't nice because it wasn't great to hear. Yeah. And that's why some people, in that scenario would have avoided it or felt deeply uncomfortable. And it was horrific. 100% the most horrific day I've ever had as a leader, because the challenge of being a leader is that sometimes not everyone is going to like what they hear, especially when you're delivering news that impacts their livelihood, their life, has a huge, huge impact on them. And it is a massive shame that I do still carry with me about the effect that that had on people that I cared about, the ones who trusted me. Yeah, the weight of knowing that our decision and what we had to do, even the stuff that was out of our control, it did change their lives. It did have a big impact on them. And I do still beat myself up about that time, catastrophizing the ways that I got it wrong, which really doesn't help anyone, doesn't make a difference. But I do remind myself is that I didn't get it all wrong. Yeah, some of the team that were made redundant have come with me into future businesses. That tells me that sometimes I did handle those situations better than I sometimes give myself credit for. And here's what I really want you to think about here. You won't get it all right. And that's okay. Yeah. We've got to let go of wanting communication every single step to be perfect. You are absolutely going to make mistakes as leaders. We all are. You're going to look back and wish that maybe you'd handled a situation differently or done something differently. That will happen. We're human beings at the end of the day. None of us have a manual of how to be a human being. But what I do think we can do, and what I really want us to lean into in the masterclass today, is that we can still show up, we can still be present, we can be honest, we can be human in these situations when our teams absolutely need us most. And I really want you to just take a moment, maybe if you're watching this on replay, just pause it, but think about a time when your teams really needed you. Yeah, when you're going through a period of change, when you're navigating something challenging, what, how, when you reflect back on that, might you have showed up differently? Yeah, what really worked? What do you feel really proud of in how you handled that situation? And what might you have done differently next time? Just sit with it for a moment. Write it out if that's your chosen method. Do a little voice memo to yourself, but really allow yourself the space as a leader to do more of this reflection time, because I think it's deeply powerful. And I think it will really help you identify those moments where you want to do something differently next time. You're going to do something differently. You're going to take action if you end up in a situation of challenge again, because you're going to, right? Life is challenging. Workplaces are challenging. But I want you to really have that moment to reflect and build that into your weekly practice. Right, so we're going to get into how we handle some of these stuff. Now we've got some context, yeah? We've got some examples of where these challenges might be coming through. So how do we handle these? How do we then move forward? So we know that controlling entire situations or disappearing just doesn't work. So what do we think could work? Well, I want to give you 3 simple anchors, things that you can control when everything else might feel out of your control, might feel really tricky or messy. Now, the first one of those is all about this presence that we've talked about. So your visibility in these moments, I believe, matters more than you having all the answers. So showing up regularly for your team, being predictable in your presence. Yeah. Your presence with your team, being available, answering questions, doing check-ins, doing those regular cycles of how you do your meetings as a team, how you do your one-to-ones. You might need to step those up and do more of them, because your presence, I think, signals to your team that you're in it together. So even when you might want to hide, and trust me, there will be moments when you might want to hide in the toilet or hide under your desk. Those are the moments when your team needs you most. So you don't need to have all the answers, but you do need to be visible, be available to them so that they know that you're in it with them. The other part, and again, you're all honest, brilliant people, right? But sometimes we don't share the incomplete stuff because we worry about how that's going to land for people. We worry about the impact on people. But actually, the things we hold back are where people start to build distrust with your team, with your organization, and within the culture. And that can become quite toxic over time. So share what you know. Also, share the stuff that you don't know. Share the stuff that you don't have answers to yet. Share what you're working on finding out. Be clear with your team on the stuff that you're trying to find out. I don't know yet is completely valid thing to say when it's followed by, here's what I do know, and here's when I'll know more, or here's what I'm doing to try and find out more information. It's that distinction, I think, between the nice stuff and maybe trying to protect everyone and the being kind. So nice protects feelings, whereas kind, for me, I believe it respects people enough to tell them the truth, even when the truth can be hard to hear. It's a bit like when we do feedback, isn't it? We've got to tell people the truth so that we can help them be more successful in their role, to grow, to expand, to get better. The final anchor, and this is the stuff that AI can't take away from us, guys. This is the things that the robots can't do, is be human, even when it's super uncomfortable. Acknowledge your own uncertainty. Name the difficulties that you're going through. Check in on how they are doing, not just on what they're doing. Your team doesn't need you to have all the stuff figured out, but they do need you to be more human with them. So share how you're feeling in this change and challenge. I think that's really powerful. Being vulnerable enough to say, I'm actually finding this really difficult. This feels deeply uncomfortable to me too. I think that's a really powerful way of building safety in your team. The word psychological safety is bandied around a lot, but essentially, I think that safety part is such a core part of what we do as leaders. We create that space for people to be open and honest about how they might be feeling. But we often need to role model that behavior first for people to know that it's safe to do that. Yeah. So sharing and acknowledging your own challenge going through this change or this uncertainty is really important. And this stuff works, right? Whether we're going through difficult change like restructures, teams transitions, the economic effects of what's going on right now in our organizations, or the change that's really exciting. Yeah, those opportunities that are happening. We still need to be visible and communicate through that because change can be challenging for people to work through when it's not communicated well. So those are the three anchors that are really nice and simple, but I just also want to kind of remind you of that bit about control. There might be some control freaks in our audience. There may even be some recovering cold control freaks, which I'm kind of trying to be. Yeah. So I want to show you a little framework that helps with this. And the circle of control stuff is the things that we really should focus on first. This is where your power is as a leader. This is things like your presence, being available to your team, how you communicate with your team, your honesty, your openness, your transparency with your team, even when you don't have all the detail. The second part, we can't necessarily control this stuff, but how you show up in that first circle, the stuff that is in our control, I believe absolutely influences these three things. So it's how your team are feeling, that morale bit, how the news lands, how you communicate that, how it lands for the individuals. You can't control how those people feel or how they behave, but you absolutely can control how you communicate that. And it will absolutely influence how that lands for people. It'll also influence how you build trust across the team as well. Now, the final one of these circles is the stuff that might be out of our control. You might not be the ultimate decision maker in this particular change or scenario. You might not have control of the timeline, and you certainly won't have control over the external factors. So I really encourage you to stop burning energy in this space. I know it's really, really hard. It's so much easier said than done in this safe space of this masterclass, but we can't control these things. So we have to find a way to really let go of them so that we are still aware of them. We're absolutely not pretending they're not happening, but we're spending our time and energy in the stuff that we can control, in how we're present for our team, how we communicate with our team so that they have the information and so that they feel actually like they've got some certainty, ironically. Because if you're really clear with your communication and they've got that clarity, actually that builds huge amounts of trust, which allows people to feel just a little bit safer, a little bit more comfortable in those uncomfortable moments. So I want you to think about where you're spending your energy. Because if you are spending it all in that outer circle, the stuff you can't control, then you don't have anything left for the stuff that actually matters. So think about how you can move and shift your energy to the stuff that you can control. Now, one of the biggest challenges I often hear from leaders when they are going through periods of change, whether it's rollout of a new exciting system, but some people feel uncomfortable with it, whether it's some change happening in their industry or in the structure of the team, I do sometimes hear people say that their team almost is paralyzed and not moving forward. Yeah, they're almost just sitting, waiting, wondering what's going on. They're waiting for clarity before they move forward, before they do the stuff that they need to get done. So, how do we keep momentum when things feel uncertain? What could we do there? We've got 4 strategies that we tend to share with people in our world who come on our programs, who join our leadership communities. And these 4 things, again, might seem obvious, but we need to think about how we're actually doing these day to day. Is this how we're showing up? So the first one is focus on the stuff that you can control. So even if the bigger picture stuff is uncertain, what can your team control right now? So not just you as the leader, but what can your team control? Break work into smaller, achievable chunks. Think about the big projects that you're trying to move forward. How can we make them more achievable, more doable, and celebrate the progress that you make? Even the teeny tiny small wins, celebrate that stuff. Come together as a team to acknowledge the successes, the things that are working, the things that you're moving forward. So think about what your team can control right now in their work, in their projects, in the stuff that still needs to get done and that we need to have momentum on. The second part of this is create predictability where possible. It's a lot of P's in that, isn't there? I quite like that. I've only just realized. So keep regular team rhythms is what I mean here. So things like I was talking to a leader yesterday who does regular kind of morning stand-ups with their team. Keep that stuff happening. Keep the one-to-ones going. Do more regular check-ins with your team. Maintain that structure, that predictability, even when the content of those conversations might be changing quite frequently. Because predictability creates great safety for your team. Yeah, that structure really helps people. If we think of our colleagues who may be neurodivergent, that structure, that expectation of what is happening will really help. Share information with people in advance if you need to, so that they've got time to reflect and review. Give people the opportunity to ask questions, to understand what's going on for them. The third part of this is give people agency where they can. So is there a way in which you could support your team members to tackle their work in a way that feels good to them? So maybe the question you ask them is something like, what would help you feel more in control right now? Try and empower some level of decision making at their level. That level of agency over situations, again, will help people just lower down their anxiety around this change, around this challenge that is coming. So really think about how you can empower that decision making. What might help them feel more in control right now? Not what you think would work. Don't make assumptions here. Ask the question. Get really clear on what that looks like for each individual in their team, so that maybe there's a level of choice there in how they tackle their work and keep momentum on the stuff that's happening. The final part of this is, and this one is tricky, I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but instead of waiting on the restructure details, which I'm hearing a lot from leaders right now, I'm hearing a lot from teams and organizations, we're kind of waiting on the details of what that restructure might look like. Sometimes that's days, maybe it's weeks. Let's be honest, sometimes it's months. I know one quite major global organization where some of their team have been waiting over 12 months to know exactly what that detail looks like, which has a huge impact on their team's well-being and mental health and their ability to keep momentum. So rather than, saying we're waiting on the restructure details, try thinking about, we don't have all the decisions yet. We don't have all the final information, but what we can do is maybe prepare for multiple different scenarios. So use the time productively to document processes, to maybe do some cross-training and development of your team so that people are more multi-skilled and have different strengths and abilities that they can add to the team. Strengthen some of your workflows and the way in which you do things. That way, whatever happens next, your team is more ready. So it turns that kind of almost passive waiting and just doing the business as usual stuff into more active readiness for the situation. So it might be that you focus on, workflow, process, ways of working, system improvement, other things alongside the business as usual stuff to maintain that momentum. Because whatever happens, your organization, you all have objectives to hit. You all have expectations to deliver on. So let's think about how you can just reframe it from being in a kind of waiting limbo to a preparing and that more active readiness. So take a moment just to kind of have a think about which of those scenarios you might be facing right now in your workplace, in your team, and just think about what could be an action you could take this week. Is it a conversation you need to have and do an extra check-in with one of your team members who you've recognized is maybe struggling a little bit or feeling uncomfortable? Is it a conversation with your whole team to think about how you keep that momentum going? What else you can do to be actively ready for whatever comes next? So just pause again if you're on replay, or if you're watching live, just take a moment, think about what that might look like for you. So change, any change we manage can have its challenge, can't it? I know a lot of organizations, people tell me, people hate change, people don't like it. I don't know if I believe that, if I'm really honest. I kind of believe that people can enjoy change, can enjoy the challenge of something different and the energy that comes with that, because change isn't always a bad thing, right? It can be a really positive, innovative opportunity. But when change hits, people go through some different stages of how they feel about that. And I don't think that's because they necessarily hate change. But what they do often hate or feel uncomfortable with is how change gets communicated to them. It can feel like it's been done to us rather than something that we are part of. So I want to show you something that might just help you understand what your team might be going through right now. This is the Kubler-Ross change curve. And this is completely normal that your team will go through these various stages. There'll be that initial shock, yeah? Like, wait, what? What's happening? That moment when the news hits, that change is coming, again, whether it's an opportunity or something that feels a bit more challenging. People will go through the denial stage. So is this really happening? Maybe it won't affect us. They're looking for evidence that this is not true because they've gone into that kind of fear mode of the unknown. People then will work through a bit of frustration. So as the reality of what's happening sets in, things are going to be different. Sometimes this can show up as anger and a bit of frustration coming through. What you then might see happen with people in your team is that their energy drops. People feel a bit low, feel a bit unmotivated. And often as a leader, this is the hardest bit to watch because they're almost in that kind of depression mode. And interestingly, the change curve mimics the grief cycles, that people go through, because there's a grieving process there when things change, when something's different. But then what happens is that people might start to engage a little bit with the new situation. They might test it out. They might be saying things like, okay, maybe this could work. And then at that point, a kind of decision happens really that they're going to learn how to work in this new reality. They start to feel maybe a bit more positive because they're accepting the change. They're going to go with it. The integration part is when the change becomes the new normal. They're kind of through it. That's when it's really kind of important to understand in this process. And I know this is going to be hard to hear, is that change just isn't linear. Yeah, I'd love to tell you that your team will beautifully glide through the change curve and straight to integration, but it isn't reality. People don't move through this curve in a nice, neat line. They might be in the experiment phase one day and slip back into frustration the next when something happens. So it's kind of like a bit of a dance, like a cha-cha-cha back and forth between the different stages of change. And different people on your team will experience the change at different points, yeah? So they'll all be at different points on the curve at the same time. And as a leader, you've really got to think about how you adapt your style, your communication to support people through that. Because what someone might need at the denial stage, when the rest of your team might be experimenting, will be very different. So you've got to think about how that looks. And here's what happens when you don't communicate, change well during those stages. When people are navigating change, any uncertainty that fills the gaps, when those gaps exist, that's when we naturally start creating those stories that I talked about before. We create our own stories. Those stories are often shaped by fear, by past experience of change and uncertainty, or by assumption. And that's where change can start to feel quite chaotic. Not because of necessarily the change itself, but because of all the stories people are creating to fill in the blanks. All that fear that's bubbling around, that's how it comes through. And so change is very much like that dance I mentioned. So sometimes you're leading, sometimes you're following, sometimes you're both just trying to not step on each other as you go through it. So your job as the leader is that you can't make people skip the stages or rush through that change. Wouldn't it be great if we could? But what you can do is ask great questions that create safety for your team. So I'm going to share with you my two absolute favorite questions. When you're working through change, when you're navigating any uncertainty with your team, asking great questions, then allowing the space to really listen to those answers and then take action from there. It's super powerful. So the first question, what can I do to make this easier for you? I think this really helps you to understand where your support actually matters to that individual, not where you might think it does. Because often we're guessing, we're making assumptions, we're maybe giving people information in the way we would love to receive it, which is still good, right? We can learn from that. But I think this question really lets them tell you, yeah? So it's not about you thinking what's going to work. It's really about you leaning into what is the support that's going to really help that person. Now, the second question is, what question do you have that you're not asking me because you're maybe worried about asking it or worried about what my answer might be? This question is gold. I know that's a bold statement, but I think this is absolute gold. It creates space for any of those quiet concerns that people might be carrying with them, maybe because of their previous experiences in other organizations or the fear of the unknown. Those kind of concerns, the ones that don't always get voiced, but maybe are sitting heavy on them. Yeah, they're carrying around this kind of heavier energy in the background, worrying, thinking about this question. And it might be one of those things that they're a bit afraid to say out loud. So when you do ask this question, you're giving permission for people to be honest about what's really going on for them. Now, you might find you need to ask this question a couple of times before you start to get the real root cause truth of what is weighing on people and how they're really feeling, because they might not feel truly safe to open up straight away. And that's okay. We've got to allow people that space, and that those feelings are very valid. But I do think when leaders ask better questions, people feel safer to be honest. And that honesty, that's the stuff that helps your team move through change with a bit more trust rather than fear. But you're going to have to role model this stuff. So it might be that first and foremost, you're the one opening up and sharing the stuff that's concerning you, the things that are weighing heavier on you, the things that you're maybe worried about asking because you're worried about the answer on. The more you can share some of that stuff, the more your team will start to feel more comfortable opening up to you. So save those questions. Use them in your next one-to-one, use them in your team meetings, create space for people to be open and honest about the change that they're going through. Get the kind of elephants in the room out there in the open, because you can't control where your team are on that change curve, but you can create more safety that helps them keep moving through it. That's your role as a leader, I believe, in change, to create that safety for people to move through that change. Now, before we wrap up, because can you believe it's already been 45 minutes? I love a chat. I want to say this, and I know we've heard this phrase before, we'll all have heard it, but do we all actually listen sometimes? You as a leader, all of us, any contributor in the world, we can't pour from an empty cup. And leading through uncertainty is incredibly draining. You're holding so much space for everyone else's anxiety, uncertainty, while also managing your own. And if you don't protect your energy, what often happens is that we become much more reactive instead of responsive. We start to avoid some of those difficult conversations because we're too tired, we haven't got the energy, and we feel depleted. You might start to disappear even when you don't mean to, because you are exhausted. And eventually that can lead to complete burnout. And then you can't show up at all. So the things I want you to think about doing instead of completely exhausting yourself through these things is set boundaries. Even during crisis, you don't have to be available 24/7 to your team. You can be really clear about when you are available. You can also be really clear about when you're not. So model healthy boundaries for your team, for all of you. One thing is find your person. What I mean by this is we often need someone when we're going through these challenges that you can process this stuff with. So not someone in your team. Maybe it's a peer in a different team. It could be a coach or a mentor. It could be someone outside of work. But you need having someone who kind of gets it and lets you be messy and be open about what's going on for you and your team. That can really help you work through and process this stuff. I'm not saying that person will have all the answers, but it's really nice sometimes just to voice what's going on and be really heard and listened to, even if that person isn't giving you any answers. Just having the space to do that can be really powerful. Separate what's yours to carry. So you're responsible for communicating with care to your team. You're not responsible for making people feel okay and happy about any difficult news. You can't fix everything. That is not your job. It's such a big task to make an individual happy. It's so multifaceted. We can't do that. You don't have the power, the control to make that happen. But you are absolutely responsible for how you communicate with care and how you create that safety for your team. One thing that I think works really well, and I wish I'd taken my own advice on this at different points in time, because it's quite, again, easy to say in the safe space of a masterclass, but when you're really in the thick of change and challenge, do we always do it? But build in those micro recoveries. So it might be a 5-minute walk between meetings, an actual lunch break. I was speaking to someone just yesterday who shared with me that they don't remember the last time they took a lunch break. And I don't just mean eating at your desk while you continue to work. That's not a lunch break. So just think about what one thing can you do each day in your working day that's just for you, so that you can take care of yourself a little bit better. Because taking care of yourself is not selfish. That is how we keep showing up for ourselves, for our team, for everyone around us. Okay, so I just want you to remember these last couple of things before we close out. You won't get it all right, and that's okay. Your team doesn't need you to be perfect. They don't need perfection. Perfection does not exist. Let go of that perfection. What they do need, though, is you. And for me, I think leadership is about showing up even when it's hard. Like I said at the start, it's so much easier, straightforward to be a leader in the good times. But when we really, I think, learn and grow as leaders are in those more challenging moments. So even when there's conflict, even when you don't have all the answers, keep showing up. We're at a moment where how we lead, I believe, matters more than ever. Yeah, in our workplaces, in our communities. The leadership we are seeing globally, it reflects what we've been allowing locally, in our workplaces, in our communities, in our towns. And I do honestly, genuinely believe that we all have the power to lead differently, but it's got to start with how we show up, whether we're a contributor in the workplace or we have the title of a leader. We're all leaders. Yeah. We all have that responsibility for our own self leadership first and how we show up in the day to day. It's those everyday actions, isn't it? And behaviors. It's not the big shiny stuff that will change things. So here's my kind of final question for you that I'd really like you to think about as you go into the next few days, the next few weeks, months in your organization. What's one way that you'll show up more intentionally for your team this week? I want you to take a few minutes today to think about that. Maybe jot it down. Pause this, come back to it, whatever you need to do, because the world really needs more leaders who are willing to hold this tension of change. And when they hold it, when they're present, when they're honest and more human in that stuff, when it's uncomfortable, that's the stuff that's going to change our workplaces and how you and your team feel when we navigate these changes. Now, if you ever have any questions on this stuff, you can always reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff, as you know. So here's some details if you want to do that. We do have a newsletter. So if you want to join our mailing list to access that, we share more stories, more tips, more tools, things that you can take action on in there. We send that out a couple of times a month. So there's loads of rich, juicy stuff in there for you to get hold of. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. And there is a bit of goat content in there if you like animals. So I'm also a goat herder when I'm not working. But thank you so much for being here today. Leadership is challenging right now for some people, but you're not alone in it. So if you did want to continue this conversation further, you can also join our Starts With Us community, which is a community of leaders that we have recently launched. It's very exciting. We've got our founding members in there already, and it's a space for leaders who are doing this work to get some of that support together. So there's workshops that you can access. There's group coaching sessions to really get into the nitty gritty of your unique opportunities, challenges, the things that you're working on. There's also a whole library of content material that we keep refreshing. We're also bringing in expert speakers to that space to give you even more learning. And we will be doing a couple of in-person events each year as well. So don't be alone in this stuff. You are doing a great job. Yeah, keep showing up, keep being intentional. And we'd love to hear from you in how you make some of this work. So go and show up for your teams. They need you. And have a most wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.